Good afternoon, everyone. Today is April 8th, 2025. It's 1 p.m. This is a City of Prescott City Council study session. We'll start with a roll call, please.
Mayor Good,
Present.
Councilwoman Fruworth,
Here.
Councilman Gambogi,
I am here.
Councilman Montoya,
Still here?
Councilman Moore,
Here.
and the record will reflect that Mayor Pro Tem Cantelmi is excused from the meeting.
We have one item for discussion today, a presentation and discussion regarding an update on SR 89 Design Concept Report Project.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Gwen Rowich, Public Works Director. Well, we're here today to give you an update on our effluent wastewater pipeline SR 89 improvements project. Just to recap a little bit, we started this discussion in June of 2023. So we're almost 2 years into the discussion. Last year in November, we entered into a contract with Kimley Horn and Associates to bring us a 15% design concept report on three top-ranked alternatives for the roadway, which has been the primary focus of the discussion. As you know, the effluent line in this right-of-way has broken over a dozen times in the last 6 or 7 years. As recently as 4th of July and Christmas last year, I don't know what it is about holidays, but it seems to like to break around the holidays when we have a lot of traffic. And so Kimley Horn is probably about 2/3 of the way through their process. And so they've come here today to give you an update. At the end of the update, he'll give you the timeline for where we're going from here, but for anybody that doesn't stay for the whole discussion, the next time we'll be talking about this is July the 8th of this year. So without further comment, unless you have questions for me, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Baird with Kimley Horn and Associates.
Thank you, Gwen. Again, just to reintroduce myself, Andrew Baird with Kimley Horn. I'm the project manager for the effluent wastewater pipelines and SR 89 improvements design concept report. That's the last time I'll say the full title. We'll say SR 89 DCR from here moving forward. So I want to thank the mayor and council for allowing me to here today to give an update on this very important project. So today, as far as an agenda and overview, I'm going to be talking and reiterating the goals and objectives of the project. I'm going to talk through the design concept report process and where we are within that process. Spend a lot of time on the data collection and analysis up to this point. So we have done a significant amount of traffic data collection and analysis, as well as geotechnical evaluation and analysis. And so obviously, as I go through that portion of the presentation or anywhere in the presentation, feel free to interject with questions and comments as I go through. Don't save questions till the end, because sometimes the slides have a lot of information on them, and I'm happy to stay on that slide as long as possible. And then we'll talk through the two different groups that we worked with to ultimately land on the alternatives that were selected that we'll be presenting here today. It's the Design Review Advisory Group that were ultimately responsible for the weighted criteria. If you recall, in November, we had 10 specific criteria that we ultimately determined the weighting of that criteria as we evaluated the alternatives. And then we had a technical committee that worked through separately evaluating the alternatives and scoring those ultimately against that criteria. And that's how we landed on the alternatives we'll be talking about today. And then, of course, as Gwen mentioned, next steps, and then questions all along the way. Don't save them until the end. And so obviously the main objective of this project is to complete the key section of the centralization to the airport facility. That's replacing the effluent main that continues to break over the years, two last year that we'll discuss a little bit more further in the next slides, and then replace and upsize the gravity wastewater main. We know that has to happen. Those are must-dos. But as we're evaluating, we're looking at minimizing rock removal necessary for these improvements. That's both subsurface and surface. And then a thorough roadway evaluation. That's going to be the main topic of discussion today, is evaluating what are the needed improvements and how do those correspond with the necessary improvements for the effluent and wastewater lines as well. So we've broken the DCR process into...
Excuse me, Andy. Councilwoman Furworth had a question.
took me up on my offer immediately.
I did.
All right.
I did my pre-work. Could you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
On the map, I noticed that the two circles on both ends of the highway was an EX and then the roundabout's names. What does EX mean? Does that mean exclude or does that mean something else?
Existing.
Existing. See, I'm glad I asked
Yes.
the question. Thank you.
We like to plant ones in there that are easy to answer for myself, so that's the first one, so thank you. So I should have described the limits of the project are SR 89 from the existing Willow Lake roundabout up to the existing Fippen Trail roundabout, a little over 2 miles of evaluation. And then the effluent wastewater lines are a little less than 2 miles. Those don't run the entire length of the project that we're looking at from a roadway standpoint. So the design concept report process, we are, as Gwen stated, about in the middle, or 2/3 of the way done. So we are through the alternative development and evaluation stage. First step is data collection. Again, traffic, geotechnical, utility, topography, and existing right-of-way. And we flew the job with a drone in December to lay out the ultimate topography. We have lined up all the existing right-of-way, so we know where everything falls in terms of existing conditions. Utilities, we've mapped. We've used some of the breaks that have occurred over the last year to actually map out the existing utilities, as well as utilize our geotechnical team to locate some of the utilities through the corridor. And again, traffic, we've done a significant amount of evaluation there. So modeling and analysis, we are about 2/3 of the way done with that as well. We will be submitting a final traffic impact analysis. We will be submitting a final geotechnical report with the DCR. But we've got enough information right now to confidently present the alternatives that are recommended based on some of the data and analysis that we've collected thus far. We had originally scoped 15 alternatives minimum, but as we developed the alternatives, we landed ultimately on 20. So the technical committee reviewed 20 alternatives that we put together. And again, weighted criteria by the advisory group, scoring by the tech committee, and 3 alternatives that scored the highest, as well as discussion on an additional alternative to be considered. And then design report concept is the design concept report is the next phase. We will be submitting 15% plans for the 3 alternatives, an initial design concept report, a final, and that falls kind of within the window of that 60-day public comment period, which is going to occur later in the project. Any questions on that process? So the images on the screen right now are the 2 breaks that occurred last year. We know the pipeline is failing. It's been failing over the last 6 years. 2 different types. Well, the breaks are the same, but the impacts to the roadway are a little different than the 2. What we've noted is what is happening with this pipe, and it's Amaron pipe, which is actually a type of bar-wrapped concrete cylinder pipe that is subject to corrosion, and that's not good when you're working with a wastewater line, an effluent line. But what we're also finding is the way it was actually backfilled and bedded. As they expose these breaks, we're finding large rock, angular rock that is actually loading onto the pipe itself and causing these breaks from the outside. You can see the pipe on the left in July 2024, that pipe is shredded. So once that breaks, also the pressure in the line starts to eat at that as well. But what we're finding, it's from the bedding over the top of that pipe itself. The December 24 break impacted the roadway much more than the July 24 break. So in addition to having to replace that section of the pipe that broke, the roadway was undermined so much that we had to close it and repave that section as well. And it occurred in the narrowest section of the project, so to actually do the work, we had to close the highway, as opposed to the July break where we were actually able to work within the highway, still operating. And that's what's shown on this next slide is as we were starting to scope this project, we were able to evaluate this break as a look at the traffic and ultimately what's happening on the highway. This break occurred, I'll say, in a convenient location because you were actually able to keep the highway open and route traffic around the old highway loop. You can see in the image on the right that traffic was detoured through that loop and crews were able to just work on that pipe and patch up the roadway in that section. What is on the left is one of the traffic tools we are using. It's called traction data. It actually tracks travel times throughout a specific corridor. And so we apply these routes to specific corridors that are going to be impacted by this project. So obviously SR89, but we're also looking at Willow Creek Road as well. So this segment is SR89 northbound from Prescott Lakes Parkway to 89A. What is shown in red and yellow along the bottom is a typical weekday where traffic duration to run this section of the corridor takes a little over 6 minutes. And you can see a subtle peak in the PM, and I think it's the way the graphic is set up with the vertical axis going up to 15 minutes. So along the vertical axis, it's duration, and along the horizontal axis is time of day. And so the colors that are in blue and green are the actual travel times while traffic was detoured and that main was being replaced. And you'll see in the PM peak period when we're having commuters coming home for the day, the traffic spiked up almost 15 minutes. So a three-time duration along that section of the corridor, which makes sense, right? We've detoured the road. We had to slow them down to about 5 miles an hour as you navigated that curve. But what we're using these detours is to gather information in terms of projecting what it would be like as you start to rebuild a new effluent line, a new wastewater line in that corridor. So these are snapshot in time of what traffic would look like if we have to run a detour condition to construct a facility that's almost 2 miles long, and you have to do that twice with the effluent line and the new wastewater. So we can gauge the impacts to traffic as it is with replacing an effluent line and start to project that out as we look at maintenance of traffic and construction timeframes through the corridor. Any questions on that data collection or that graphic? So next was a little different of a detour, to say the least. This was December when the entire highway had to be closed to patch up that section of the effluent line. We took our drones out there and captured aerial imagery of Willow Creek Road. That was ultimately what was posted in terms of the detour route. And as you can see, and as expected, is it was gridlock almost all the way to the highway to the north, south, all the way to Willow Lake Road. We also got out there and got traffic counts to look at the volume of cars that were rerouted over there to see where, when we close 89, traffic is choosing to disperse. There's obviously other routes you can take to get to your destination. You can take Willow Creek Road, which was what was posted. You can go on Williamson Valley Road, perhaps Glassford. And so a future slide I'll show, we were able to kind of capture where traffic was going there. So just a quick step back in terms of data collection that we're pulling. I'd already briefly mentioned the data we were collecting during those detours. But we use a series of tools to get a whole picture of the traffic through the corridor. Number one is traffic counts. Very simple. Count the number of cars in a peak hour, in a day, and start to look at big picture level of service on a roadway. The slide on the right, the image on the right, I'll be talking level of service as we talk through the traffic section, is just a simplified breakdown of level of service and how that relates to traffic. So A, B, and C are in green. Conveniently, everyone loves green. Free flow is level of service A. We talk about a road that anyone can pretty much go the speed limit and not have any conflicting movements with side streets or adjacent vehicles coming in, all the way to C, which is still stable flow, where we're still seeing cars being able to get through a corridor with little to no impacts from side streets, or the volumes themselves are allowing you to get through a specific corridor. As we get to actually D, E, and F, that's when flow goes from stable to unstable to forced flow. And that's when we start to hit gridlock. Unstable flow is you can have a corridor specifically where there's enough capacity in the highway itself. And that's what we're finding with this section. But there is little to no room for side streets to get access. And once those cars actually make their way into the queuing on the highway, you can see the instability of that network, where one car can really impact some of the traffic upstream. That happens 2 or 3 times down a corridor, and now you're into this forced flow and this gridlock condition. So where we're operating right now with the existing highway is at a level of service E. So we're at that unstable flow to where right now you're driving that corridor. You're in the morning, you have a car that's maybe 1 second ahead of you. You feel like you're in free flow, but there's no gaps for other cars on the side streets to connect to that roadway. And we are running out of capacity on that roadway, and we'll run through that as we start to talk through overall level of service based on our counts. Anybody have any questions on just the overall kind of level of service and how that relates to?
No, Andrew, did you compare your analysis with the SIMPO analysis that was published 5 years or so ago?
Yes, that's on a couple slides from now. I'll go through the.
Yeah,
our
I know
comparisons of theirs.
their estimate of growth and traffic growth, I think, was a little overly conservative.
Yep.
Because we're already hitting the 2030 levels already.
Yes.
And that intersection of Willow Lake and Willow Creek, and I made this comment publicly and even in some of my comments in the Courier, that if you want to know what we're going to be looking like in a couple of years if we don't widen 89, then that 3 or 4 signal light change trying to get through the Willow Lake, Willow Creek intersection is going to be a common occurrence.
Yep.
And when you have that happen, people get desperate to try to get to work on time or some other reason, and they start making really dangerous traffic moves. So I think there's no doubt in my mind that we have to have a widened section in that narrow. And if it's going to take 6 months or a year to construct it, then we have to make sure that the widening on 69 is completed, because we saw a lot of people commuting in from Prescott Valley that were coming down 69, and of course they had construction going on at that time too. Yep. So that became gridlock. So fortunately, they finally have done the widening, although a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that they're going to start with the raised median, and we're going to lose another lane here for another 3 or 4 months. So once we decide on whatever the preferred option here is in 89, then I'm sure we're going to try to coordinate with ADOT to make sure we have the least disruptive, and it will be disruptive, but the least disruptive option as construction then proceeds.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mr. Mayor. And we found that as we were looking at the closure of 89 and where traffic was being rerouted, we got counters out Williamson Valley Road and counters out on Willow Creek Road. Did not get them out on 69, but we're talking to some of the folks that traveled that corridor and said that was just as bad. And so went back and kind of did the math and said, okay, some cars chose to follow the detour, others made their own route, the path of least resistance, or so they thought. Others maybe took Glassford down to 69 and made their way into Prescott under a construction condition, which was even worse. So yeah, all of that, some of these major arterials and highways where you need to consider just the overall network of how people are going to get to and from their destination or their origins, and we'll talk through that in another slide we have. But yes, that should be considered. You want the next available roadway that you're going to detour to be finished and at its highest capacity so you can accommodate that detour traffic during construction conditions. That's absolutely correct. And you stole all the information of my slide 2 from now, so I won't even have to go over it. So thank you for saving time for everybody. I've talked about travel times, so we're using that as a means to track congestion, and we actually use that to calibrate our traffic model. Origin destination is another one that we're looking at in terms of we want to know who is using the roadway, where they're coming from, and ultimately how far they are traveling. So it's not just travel times and counts, it's ultimately looking at this from a regional perspective and who is using this highway. Crash data is another one that we can utilize in terms of evaluating potential improvements that will help to mitigate some of the safety concerns. And we obviously have a slide to discuss that, and it's actually available on the project website, which is sr89improvements.com, shameless plug. So there's a dashboard there where you can actually go and look at the interactive crash data based on type and year that it occurred. We also look at intersection analysis from a level of service. I talked earlier about, in some cases, you might have a level of service on the throughput along the highway, but you've got a level of service F because no car can actually get on the highway because there aren't any gaps. And we found that, I don't know if you recall from a year and a half ago, a car waiting for 90 seconds to make a turn because there just simply isn't any gaps. And to the mayor's point, every second after 45, 46 seconds, you get impatient and then you start to make decisions that are unsafe because you got to get somewhere. So we started to look at that from some of the improvements into minimizing some of that side friction that ultimately is an issue in terms of safety. And all this rolls into the traffic model, which we'll present the model as it sits right now. We're done with the existing conditions model. We're going to use this as we start to model future improvements based on growth factors as well as the improvements that are recommended today. So here's that very slide the mayor was talking about. I'm going to let you take it away, Mr. Mayor, and tell me what I'm seeing here. So we did base everything based as a starting point on the SIMPO model, and as indicated, the volume and the growth projections were conservative, if not low. So now I'm going to use this that I just learned how to use today, which is going to be really fun. And so what I'm going to point you right here is the SR89 numbers in terms of the SIMPO projected model in 2045, and it's 20,000 vehicles per day. What's shown in the table at the top is 2018 volumes that were taken at that time, and then projecting out 2030 and 2045. And then we've got in the middle there the 2024 detour volumes that I discussed. And so as you look at it, in 2045, they projected 20,000 vehicles, but we're counting 22,000 vehicles already in January of 25. So we've exceeded 2045 volumes on SR89. This was mapped, and what's shown, one day I'll get good at this, first time learning. Right here is where we're looking at just the color codes again of level of service D, E, and F. And this is looking at 89 and Willow Creek Road, the two primary north-south corridors for volumes of traffic. And SIMPO was projecting that by 2030, that 89 was already going to be in a level of service F, but then Willow Creek Road was going to be close in those projections as well, getting close to 34,000 vehicles in 2045. Interestingly enough, in our counts during that detour was 36,000 vehicles on Willow Creek Road. So while obviously we closed a major north-south route, what was experienced there by the travelers was a failing roadway that is projected in a model that is conservative at best. And so again, I think Ian Mattingly spoke of this a year and a half ago, is not only thinking of just your highway in terms of your north-south movements around one corridor, but it's looking at all your north-south capacity of all your arterial and highway. And so you're running out of volume and capacity on those roadways, and that's evident by when we have to close 2 lanes of travel, you're at gridlock on your major arterial coming through town. And so again, we're looking at these in terms of not only traffic, but what is going to happen when we have to build the needed infrastructure, the effluent and the wastewater line? That has to happen. You have to build it within a section of existing roadway, and you have to do something with traffic. And then again, to the mayor's point, we tracked 36,000 vehicles, so they added 11,000 of the 22,000. Williamson Valley Road saw an additional 5,000 during the detour, so the rest likely went down 69. So the remaining 6,000 to 7,000 were using 69, which was under construction, and perhaps they went down Glassford and overloaded that roadway as well.
And you can point out on the 2045 volume chart that the intersection of Willow Lake and Willow Creek is indicated as an F
Right.
in red.
Right. And part of the problem there too is you're connecting a 4-lane arterial to a 2-lane highway with a 2-lane roadway. And so a lot of time that gets overtaxed with trying to reroute traffic there. And we saw that to where when we were looking at the detours, northbound travel that had to detour on Willow Lake Road, that section of roadway was severely congested in the PM. Then you hit Willow Creek Road northbound and you had the 2 lanes, and that was a little more of a free flow travel at that time. So yeah, you have capacity concerns when you link 2 major roadways with a smaller, really collector street. You obviously create a bottleneck, and that's what Willow Lake Road serves, and especially at that intersection. And so again, picture on the left is the gridlock along Willow Creek Road, and then the slide on the right, or the image on the right, is again looking at travel times along that segment. So we had 36,000 vehicles that were traveling on that roadway when it was detoured, but we found something interesting in the data on this day is that the baseline condition when we're not detouring is again that green and blue along the bottom, where you are just hovering around 5 minutes to make this travel time duration from southbound Willow Creek, Pioneer Parkway down to Willow Lake Road, so a little shy of 4 miles. So we had an AM peak from 7:30 to 8:30, which we would expect commuters coming in to work, which was about 3 times the travel time, approaching 15 minutes. Then, starting from around 11, all the way really carrying through the afternoon, was we saw a spike of upwards of 25 to 30 minutes, where we started seeing noon travelers that were driving that southbound corridor. And we were going into it kind of expecting that we'd see more of an even distribution of kind of an AM, PM peak. And we actually went to reset some of our cameras out there at noon, and I got a call that said southbound is still gridlocked. And so this lends itself towards, we've got a community with a lot of retirees and people that don't work, and they have the flexibility to start driving from noon to 6. Yes, that's you, Councilor Gambogi. Sorry. I can see you over there. I've got this view from up here I've never had before. It's incredible. So we were a little bit surprised by this data, but also as we started to look through the origin destination data that was available, it made sense that for people that don't have to actually drive a corridor to go to work from 7:30, 8:30, they have some flexibility. But we saw there was a lot of travel in the southbound direction throughout the day. So we really hit another peak around noon, which carries through all the way into 6 p.m. when traffic obviously starts to dissipate as people are getting home for the evening. And so that was some interesting data that we pulled from that detour. And again, this is on Willow Creek Road, not on SR 89. This was during the detour. And so this is everyone's favorite table with lots of numbers and colors and letters, which we've tried to actually simplify, if you believe it. So what was asked in some of the advisory group meetings as well as the tech committee meetings was, when we start to say a level of service E or an F, is that just a couple hours a day and the rest of the time traffic is operating just fine? So we can actually break this down by hourly counts, and this is two-way traffic. And so the graphic along the top, the table is a breakdown of B, C, D, and E and the volume of traffic. So the D threshold is 1,300 vehicles in 2 directions. So once you get above 1,330 vehicles in 2 directions, you are now in the E level. E is from 1,330 up to 2,710. Again, this is a wider range just because now the instability of the roadway, you're able to add a lot more cars, but it's forced flow and it's starting to be severely unstable, but you're not yet failing. And so you'll see from the volumes by hour, it matches kind of what we saw in the previous slide with, we have an AM peak that's operating a level of service E, but then we see a slight dissipation where we're down to a D from about 8 to 10, and then it starts to rise back up again all the way throughout the day, where this section of roadway is a level of service E all the way until 6 p.m. And then after 6 and 7, then we're back to a D and a C. These are 2 different counts. So we did counts actually in May of 23 as some of the analysis for the potential future park. And then we actually, as I indicated earlier, we did counts in January 25, and very similar in terms of volume, but you see we actually have an E that lasts a little longer into that 8 to 9 window on the graphic on the right. So this was some of the questions that came up as we were talking through with the technical committee and the advisory group as we worked at the kind of big picture level of service on a given volume of traffic for a day, but then just the breakdowns in terms of traffic, two-way traffic throughout the day. And we're seeing that the roadway is consistently in that level E unstable flow based on volumes. And one thing just to clarify, and again, this came up in the advisory group meeting as well as the technical committee, is these are planning level of services. So these are basic capacities of lanes, of two-way highways, 4-lane highways. As we start to look at this, level of service gets a little more complicated, and that's what our traffic impact analysis will have in terms of, you have to look at speeds, geometry, impacts in terms of side streets, and have an overall picture of level of service through the corridor and at the intersection. So some questions came up that these are almost like too rudimentary to state as like the end-all be-all level of service, but these are from a planning level in terms of a lane capacity. These are level of services of a highway, of a two-way highway. And obviously, again, as we expand on the report, it'll be more refined, but big picture is you're operating at a level of service E right now, and the data is showing that. Any questions?
Councilman
So I can
Moore.
get a drink? Oh, thank you, Councilman.
You're welcome, Andrew. I know the focus of this meeting is really to talk about Highway 89, but we've spent a lot of time talking about Willow Creek. Question for Willow Creek, and maybe Gwen or Ian would be better to answer this. Part of the problem is we have 3 stoplights in very short succession to one another between Commerce, Sandretto, and Willow Lake, and it backs the traffic up. Has there been any consideration of maybe putting a roundabout like where Willow Lake and Willow Creek intersect? Is that a possibility? And would that improve traffic flow to have a roundabout? Because what happens is southbound traffic wanting to turn left on Willow Lake backs up so far that the free-flowing lane can't go because the traffic wanting to turn left is backed up into the free-flowing lane, and that backs traffic up even more. And then you have a stoplight, and then you have another stoplight. Is it possible to eliminate some stoplights and maybe put in a roundabout there? Just a question.
Well, I'll say anything's possible. But I believe that we would have to do a pretty extensive analysis there because of the bridge. It's the bridge that constrains our ability to make alterations in that particular intersection. We've talked about that at staff level a couple of times, and we recognize that it's a bottleneck area, but we're going to have to address that, I think, on its own. And we're probably going to have to get some professional consultants to help us determine what would be the best way to address that. And you have multiple signals because you have so much traffic coming in from the side streets. You have to have that controlled intersection. That's why you have all the lights. But we can certainly take a look at that and little area there where Willow Creek and Willow Lake come together, and that whole area. We should probably look at the whole thing.
One thought, and I know Willow Lake Road isn't designed for this, but a double left-hand turn lane would be helpful instead of a single left-turn turn lane. But then you have a roadway that's only 2 lanes in each direction. It's not double lane.
Again, the
But just to
right-of-way.
try to get that traffic off of Willow Lake Creek Road onto Willow Lake to clear up Willow Creek. I don't know if we could use any right-of-way or take right-of-way onto Mortimer's to add another lane on that side so you could have a double left-turn lane.
Our constraints are the limited right-of-way that we have. So again, that would have to be looked at quite extensively. But your points are well taken.
Yeah, I mean, to Councilor Moore's point, there's a traffic issue on Willow Creek and on 89. And so you're ultimately going to be looking at, obviously today we're talking primarily, as you indicated, about SR 89, but Willow Creek Road needs to be closely considered. But a lot of this was looking at if traffic really starts to continue to build on SR 89 as it's going to, and people start to seek different routes that are less congested, then Willow Creek Road is going to see more. So it's going to be kind of a back and forth balancing act based on the lane capacity that you have. But then you have to start to look at, intersections. This goes back to corridor level service. We can't just look at a highway with zero, fully access controlled with no intersections. As you indicate, Willow Creek Road, if we looked at it from strictly just a lane capacity standpoint, it may operate at a higher level of service. But as you start to introduce intersection control, signals, roundabouts, side streets, that's where your level of service degrades as a corridor. And to your point, you've got to start to synchronize signals or look at alternatives for intersections. Then going back to just overall level of service from an overall volume, this is looking at projected level of service based on growth rate. And so I list that as a regional growth rate of 2.75%. This came from looking at past traffic counts with ADOT counters over a 5 and a 10-year period. So we saw a variation in growth rates, but nothing that was below 2.75. We saw a 10-year growth rate of 3.6% based on counts on the highway, and the lowest was a 5-year at 2.75. SIMPO was again conservative in their projections. They were closer to about 1.5% based on their past model, and obviously we have exceeded that based on what we've realized over the last 5 or 10 years, and so. We're confident in this growth rate in terms of projections for future traffic. And again, we've checked that against past historical data based on counters. One question's come up is this is not based on population growth. This is based on vehicular counts. Now, obviously, as a community or a region grows and you have a major north-south highway, you will see your traffic growth rate exceed your population growth rate if you have people traveling from different municipalities to access, the other areas that their ultimate destination is. But this-
Councilman Gambogi.
How'd you come up with 2.75?
So this was 2.75 was the exact growth rate over the last 5 years of traffic counters by ADOT. So ADOT's counted traffic
Oh, it's
continually on
traffic
89.
increase, not the growth of Chino or not the growth of
Correct.
Lindsay.
Correct. This is growth of vehicles.
So I think we're building somewhere in the vicinity of 10,000 homes up by the airport. That's not included in the 2.75?
We are just based it on, past historical data for our growth rates.
Wow.
We,
Thank you.
So we have, that was another question that came up at the advisory group meeting, is we just looked at just a big picture of Deepwell Ranch, for example, and 10,000 units. Single-family residential generates 7 trips a day on average. So if you have 10,000 units, that's 70,000 cars a day. So they're not all going to go on SR 89, obviously, but if you split that by a third, that's 22 to 23,000 cars by itself. So we looked at that in terms of, again, kind of a truth check. We didn't look at growth rate based on master plan communities and number of roofs. We looked at past data and projected out to follow that. But we went and looked back at just one community and said, if this actually gets full build out and you've got people that are coming from the airport south into town, they're going to take either Williamson Valley, Willow Creek, or SR 89. And that's going to be a significant amount of vehicles that are added to the roadway. So this is this very well could be a conservative growth rate as well, but it's 2.75 is pretty typical of traffic in the state as you look at other communities. It's normally doing like 2.5 to 3.5%. So we're kind of hugging that middle of that average.
Councilman Montoya.
Thank you, Mayor. Andrew, I'm curious, and is there any consideration about potential commercial development happening in North Prescott and how that might impact the flow of traffic?
Yeah, certainly if you were to build a Sam's Club out there, you'd have less people that would be going to Costco. Personally, I like Costco better, so I'd probably come into Costco anyway, just because I have a card there. I've never been to Sam's Club, so I guess that's not a fair answer. But that's why we just broke it into thirds. So we said, all right, if you've got 7 trips, maybe that trip to the grocery store or that trip to the park stays local. But no matter what, you're still going to see people coming south into downtown. You're still going to have people working in downtown. You're still going to have growth in other areas. So even looking at that in terms of a third, let's say 2/3 stay internal to the airport and never go south, another third is going to venture south. And they're going to take the highway or Willow Creek Road to go there. So, we didn't want to come with like this grows and all these trips are coming south. That's certainly not true. And there's certainly going to be a certain amount of circulation that stays in that community. But history shows people are still going to come into downtown.
No, that makes sense. I just wanted to throw out there as a consideration. I appreciate that.
Yep. And so based on that regional growth rate of 2.75%, we're at a failing level of service by 2034. And that passes that 28,500 threshold for average annual daily traffic. So daily traffic of 28,000. Project that all the way out to our horizon year is a 25-year horizon year, so 2050. That's 44,000 cars, and that's obviously still level of service F. To put this in perspective, this is on a 2-lane highway. A 4-lane highway has a capacity that stays in that level of service C or D range of about 45,000 cars. So you would meet this capacity in 25 years if this growth rate continues, if you see the same volume still continue to grow on that highway. You would be in that C/D category. So going from that stable flow into unstable flow, but that's 25 years out. So that's just the capacity of 4 lanes versus 2 lanes. Big picture, again, it's a big picture level of service in terms of just corridor level of service on a highway.
Looks like you need some more Fs. Maybe a double F or a triple
I
F.
tried. I tried to just keep going this table all the way to like 2090, and staff rightfully said, all right, enough red and Fs, buddy. Any questions on our projections? And so as mentioned, this is just a snapshot of the crash data that's available on the dashboard. Anybody can get in there on the website and look at it by year, by type, by time of day. So it's an interactive dashboard. What this is just really showing here is kind of big picture collision manners. This data goes back 2019 through 2023. Normally you get published crash data from the year before, about 6 months later after it's all processed. So we'll be able to update this with 2024 data probably in the next 2 months. One thing that's interesting to note is the majority of the collisions are single vehicle or rear end, which kind of lends itself to potential distracted driving, which is an obvious issue nowadays, but also a road under congestion where you don't have enough space in front of you and enough time to respond. So a lot of rear end and single vehicle accidents. The mitigation factor for that, number one, is a shoulder. So you want to obviously have a clear zone as you approach a car. You need space to avoid that collision. And so as we kind of look at safety improvements and what's called crash modification factors, a shoulder will help mitigate for some of these, just in terms of a car can actually react and get out of the way, and rather than hit a curb or a rock face, should you not have enough space, at least we would be able to kind of reduce the number of these crashes in the corridor. And that's just one example. There's a bunch of information on the website and the dashboard.
So that 5.98%, that's for left turn accidents? So somebody trying to make a left turn across the primary traffic lanes?
Yep.
Or somebody trying to make a left turn from one of the traffic lanes across?
I believe it's
the
left
side-
from the side
street.
streets onto the highway. And please don't ask me about the 0.05% number, because I can neither see the graph or answer it. Similar to crash data, we collected origin destination data using a software called Streetlight. And this is able to use connected vehicles or the GPS in your phone, as well as census data to really get a full picture of where's everybody starting, where are they going, are they working, are they visitors, are they retired? And the big thing from this graphic is that over 85% of vehicle trips are coming from 5 to 30 miles as they pass through this section of the highway. So 85% of trips are between 5 to 30 miles away, and they pass through SR 89. Put that in perspective, on the map there, Williamson Valley, 13 miles, Paulden, 26 miles, Chino Valley, 17 miles, Prescott Valley, 12 miles, all the way up to Cottonwood, 43 miles in the county. So again, this is a regional road. This is not just local traffic. This is a highway where we're having people come from Chino Valley, come from Prescott Valley, and that's evident by just kind of a simple origin destination of where people are coming and where are they ultimately going. And we know this again because it's through GPS technology that tells us ultimately where everyone is traveling and their origins and their destinations.
Councilman Gambogi?
That graphic was pretty eye-opening to learn that people came from so far away. What technology do you have to use it, and is that the same technology they used to lock up Granny on January 6th?
I'll answer the first part of that question, hopefully. So yeah, it's using your phones or the GPS in your vehicles. And what we do is we broke it down on the next slide. We broke it down by zip code. So we basically set up a polyline or a geofence that basically shows once someone starts from a given origin and they land in a destination, that's one vehicle trip. And we ultimately add all that up in terms of people coming, for example, here from Chino Valley into Prescott, and we can pull that information. And that's primarily from, nowadays cars have GPS built in, or your cell phone.
So if the car did not have GPS and you did not have a cell phone in it, you wouldn't catch them.
So you still would, because what they do is they pool all this data together and create an algorithm that accounts for those that don't have that. So we're not missing that that trip that does not have that connected, we know that there's a certain percentage. This goes again back with census data in terms of those that maybe don't have this technology, and we add that in. And the truth check on this was this number, if anyone wants to add all this up, is right around at 22,000. So we have 22,000 cars, and we already know 22,000 cars from our counts in January. So again, kind of a truth check in the data that the origin destination data from Streetlight is almost right on with our traffic counts in January.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some technology that I wish didn't actually exist, and this one I think is good in terms of being able to actually look at traffic patterns, where people are going, ultimately growth rates, and really kind of make decisions on what's needed for infrastructure. This is a pretty interesting technology that's being used. And then one thing that we pulled, we don't have to go through each one of the worker class, but just this lends itself towards what we found, again, with that graphic of the majority of travelers from that noon to 6 window and that travel time graphic. Well, we've got, of the 22,000 trips, we've got 12,000 that are unemployed or not employed or retired. And that pings, it's so that we're not pulling that from someone's phone. That's taking and aggregating census data, tying that with location, pinging that to your phone, and putting this all together. And again, we can truth check some of this, we can ground check some of this, but this data is pretty sound in terms of who's using this roadway and ultimately time of day that they're traveling. And so ultimately, all of this data gets rolled into our traffic model. And so what I'm going to share is just the base condition model. On the left is what is our VISM model, is what we use, where we put together traffic counts, travel times, and we actually calibrate it within a certain number of standards that must be met before we can say this baseline model is accurate. And then on the right is actual drone data from a similar time, an AM peak right around just ahead of 8 a.m., hopefully. And so it's one thing to just initially note, it's very similar. It's not going to be exact because, again, we're not just running out there and doing videos and then matching the model to a video. We're ground checking this. So you can see a significant number of traffic coming in from the south. One thing that's been brought up from kind of a mitigation factor is just that that transition into a single lane coming out of the roundabout, that ultimately needs to be extended. That's too short, and that's creating some bottlenecking coming right out of the departure side of the roundabout anyway. And then you'll see kind of some examples as vehicles enter the roundabout, and this is just a small snapshot on what that does in terms of just unstable flow. Is now that one car came through on the right, and it created several more cars having to stop. If you start to repeat that, again, as development comes and more cars come to enter the roundabout, that is going to be exacerbated upstream the more and more traffic you add. So when you look at this, you're also seeing like this looks pretty free flow, but what I see is almost zero capacity on the roadway. You've got cars basically platooning all the way into town, and obviously we have no side streets coming in here. But as we start to get through the areas where you have connected driveways and streets trying to interact, this is where you have zero gap times, and really people have to wait for a significant amount of time to get on the roadway. And this is where that level of service gets a little more complicated in terms of we can't just look at it from just the throughput along the highway itself, but ultimately how some of these side streets are interacting with this traffic. But very similar in terms of what you see on the actual video on the right.
Councilwoman Furworth.
Thank you, Mayor. I love the modeling data, and I wonder if we could model if other businesses or other kinds of infrastructure was built on the side around all the sides plots around the traffic circles, what that might do to the danger or accident level in our circles as well. Would you be able to do something like that with this modeling?
Yeah, you can.
Awesome.
So yeah, you can look at if for example, you know that a development's coming on that's going to add 100 units and they have to tie in, Again, that goes 100 times 7. You got 700 trips that you put throughout the day. We can add that and show what that would look like in terms of a scenario. Most of the time, the right-of-way comes to those on the highway, and so all it would really show is a significant amount of queuing. And then this model, you can actually you can tweak the aggression of the driver, and you can actually go, you set it to a gap time of 5 seconds, but you can actually calibrate it to go 1, 2, and you can watch it and show, this is what this looks like as we talked earlier, as you start to wait longer and longer, you're gonna get more aggressive. And I've seen models we've put together where you can see near collisions that are modeled, and that's something you could possibly expect.
And modeling vehicles that have flashing lights and sirens and stuff, could that all be added to the chaos of the modeling?
We'll just color code them red.
Okay, that would be good. Thank you.
We'll call that flashing. But yep. Yeah, and part of our counts too, we look at truck traffic as well. So as the model is built, you'll see there's actually trucks on here. That's based on a truck percentage that we pulled from our counts. So our counters actually look at that as well. So that is our traffic collection analysis. Are there any questions just specific on traffic before I move on to some of our geotechnical findings?
Well, I'll just make the comment that we will continue to have commuters coming into our primary work area from distance away. That's kind of ties in with all the work we've been doing for workforce housing, trying to find some solution to that locally so people don't have to commute as far. But that is a very, very difficult solution there, and probably unlikely to find anything substantial in the near future. So we have to plan on more people continuing to commute from Chino Valley or from Prescott Valley into the downtown core. If we can get Arizona Eco Development progressing to some of their commercial development up north of 89A, then that should relieve some of this need to travel all the way down to Costco or Walmart or Trader Joe's or something like that, if they have something similar to shop at without having to come through 89. But that's kind of beyond our ability to immediately control that. It's up to the developers to be able to put that in and then be able to attract the kind of retailers that would keep people local, doing their local shopping and not have to commute. So I think the 2.75 projection of vehicle growth is really a good one, because most of the growth numbers we've seen before are always based on census. And census hardly ever captures those people who have a second home up here. I just got a letter, I think yesterday, where somebody who lives in Scottsdale and his wife doesn't like the heat down there, so they bought a place in Hassayampa, and they're going to be coming up here during the heat of the summer and on weekends. So they contribute to vehicular traffic, but they don't show up on census. So I think vehicle traffic is a much more reliable number to try to plan from. So we've got our work cut out for us, don't we?
No, not really. And just going back to, there's nothing that can replace Trader Joe's, as my dad once said. I remember when that first came here, they threw a party, and I didn't get it, but then I went there and I realized it. So unless there's a Trader Joe's out there, everyone's still coming to Trader Joe's. So moving on to geotechnical, if those that recall, we closed the highway at the end of January for night work so that we could actually do some significant geotechnical investigations. So we did 3 parts. Ground penetrating radar, which actually locates known voids subgrade. And so we could actually identify softer materials below the roadway, as well as locate the pipes that are in the ground. I've got a slide that shows that. We completed seismic refraction, which uses sound waves to determine rock density. And that's the image on the right there is them putting down the seismic lines and actually running that test. We did that at several locations throughout the roadway. as well as at the surface, up in the outcroppings, so we can understand the density of that rock. What we found subsurface, just from seismic refraction, was that the rock material was weaker than the surrounding surface rock, which is good. So what that tells us is we can use mechanical equipment, rock trencher, rock saws to actually construct the effluent and the wastewater line. We will hit some areas where we'll have low production values, slow trenching because we will hit some rock, but for the most part, this area, specifically where they're at right now in the southbound lane, we found that that area was a softer dig relative to what you'd anticipate with digging through solid rock, obviously. On the surface, up on the outcroppings, while we found that rock was very dense, we did find what was joint sets and plane shears at 3-foot increments. So what that means is you can find these bands, and that's that image kind of down there at the bottom left, where we would anticipate you could shear off that rock on an average of 3-foot increments all the way up to 30 feet. We used drone flights at high resolution to pull this imagery, as well as we had our geotechnical team boots on the ground up there, and then we actually ran seismic lines up there as well. It's one of the most complicated evaluations they're completing, so we're not done with this yet. But when it's done, we will be able to identify kind of where these shear zones are and what angle we can expect we'll be able to remove that rock if needed, and if that's ultimately what we move forward with. And that varies anywhere from right now about 70 degrees all the way to almost near vertical with what we're finding. So we've got some flexibility in, again, that kind of that 3-foot increment on average. And as we start to shape potential alternatives for roadway improvements, we can line that up with some of these shear zones and really reduce the amount of removal necessary to get the number of lanes that are ultimately required. But again, this is a pretty complicated effort to complete, and they're about halfway done with this evaluation. The field work's done, but they sent it to the lab, and then they're actually going to come back out in early May and run some kind of additional boots on the ground testing just to get a better idea of it. We also actually did borings within the corridor, and you can see the graphic on the top right is where we completed our 10 borings. And so this is just as you'd expect. We're boring down until we hit rock. Again, kind of the good news from kind of the roadway corridor itself, the rock depth varied from 3.5 to 9 feet. And so when we're starting to look at depth of effluent line, depth of the wastewater line, the effluent line being that it's a pressure system, we can actually kind of vary that depth so that we can stay kind of out of those rock areas. But a gravity line, we may be getting deeper into that kind of that 9-foot zone. So again, we will be trenching through rock, but the depth wasn't as shallow as we originally anticipated. The bad news on there is specifically through the narrow section, borings 3 through 7, it's tough to see on the graphic, but we found no determinable aggregate base layer. What that means is from a structural standpoint, a roadway consists of primarily 2 structures or 2 surfaces. You have your surface course, your asphaltic concrete layer, and then your aggregate base layer. That makes up your structural section. That gives you a structural number that you need based on the number of cars on a roadway. At a minimum, what we need out here based on existing traffic, 22,000 cars per day, we need 6 inches of AC on 10 inches of AB. Right now what we're finding is 3.5 inches of AC, which was actually put down by the city about 5 years ago, and then a very weak section of AC that's very old, so that's basically serving as an AB layer, and then we're basically on sand and silt, so basically we're on subgrade. So the section you have is not sufficient at all for existing traffic, not to mention projected traffic, depending on ultimately what you have on that section of roadway. So similar to seismic, our geotechnical team is running evaluations of different scenarios of lanes versus growth rates, coming up with a series of potential recommendations for a roadway structural section. But at a minimum, this roadway does not meet any sort of requirement. And it's evident when, again, we saw that with that break back in December where the effluent line undermined the roadway. And I think one of the comments we got from the city was like, we can't see an AB layer out here. And that was proved out in the 10 borings we got. So
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're saying that based upon the subsurface condition of those pipes and the the shading that you encountered, we'll probably have to expect continuing failure periodically throughout until we have a final solution.
You will have continued failure until it's fully replaced, bedded properly, and you have a sufficient roadway structure over it to account for the traffic loading that's occurring. Yes. And so we've kind of gone through that. It's kind of a three-part, not to be a Debbie Downer, but you've got a three-part almost failure. You've got the existing structural section we said now that is not meeting any sort of requirement. You've got your roadway from a lane capacity that is nearing failure or will be in the next 8 to 9 years. And we've already shown the effluent line that just broke twice last year. And so, and obviously this is why over the last 3-4 months we've gone to this effort level to collect all this data, to understand exactly what you have and start to make recommended improvements based on, again, as I go through the next slides, is what our advisory group and our technical committee came up with. But from a fact-finding standpoint, you've kind of got a three-part failure in this corridor right now. Man, everyone's so down. Sorry. It's so quiet. Oh, man. Awkward pause. Let's move on to the next slide. Jeez. And then so from a ground penetrating radar, already indicated that we can actually, that's the slide, the image on the lower left, which I challenge anyone to tell me what that says there because it's so small. But this is from our initial geotech. You just kind of the wavy area is showing where existing trenching and kind of a softer lens of material exists. And then the more solid area is where we're hitting solid rock. And so we were able to locate the exact location of the wastewater line that's on the left side and the effluent line, which is a little shallower, and you can see the trenching. And then in between them, also you have, again, this is kind of that 3 to 9 foot range where you do have softer material. You're not too solid rock or granite yet. So then the image on the right that's larger is looking at just, again, potentially in the narrowest section, ultimately what would need to occur. So what has to happen is the effluent main and the gravity main and existing, that has to remain operational while you build the new effluent line. The path of least resistance, so to speak, for that new effluent line is near the center line, possibly kind of closer to the center of the southbound lane. So that's where we have it located, sufficient space away from the gravity main and in an area where you have a softer dig and you're not hitting rock. But going back to some of those earlier discussions on detouring of traffic, you're going to need at a minimum, and this is a bare minimum, a 24-foot work zone. And that's bare minimum because you're not even accounting for changing out of equipment and storage and changing out of different blades that you'll need for trenching. And so that area could very well get a little larger. But you've only got 42 feet to work with in that existing area. So to build the effluent line, you will at a minimum need to run just one-way traffic for a certain duration, or you'll have to go back to a full closure. And that's, again, the next steps where we're going to start to look at production rates based on what we're finding from the geotechnical information and what we can expect for durations to build both those lines, and ultimately what that's going to do for maintenance of traffic.
Councilman Moore has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Andrew, I think you kind of skipped over something just a second ago real lightly, but I think it raises a bigger issue. You mentioned that the existing 24-inch Amaron line has to stay operational until this project's complete. And I can't help but think if we're boring and digging and trenching and doing all this work to install the new 24-inch effluent line and the gravity sewer line, that could exacerbate additional breaks in the old line with all that construction work going on,
Yep.
which can complicate this matter even more. And that wasn't mentioned, but I think that should come to light.
No, because I'd already mentioned some real negative news. I didn't want to add on to it. I was hoping that you would do it, Councilor Moore, so thank you. No, that is the primary discussion from our geotechnical team, is creating almost a barrier there and maybe coming in and cutting in between that and creating some sort of barrier so you can't transfer that load as you're starting to work from the other side. And so understanding where that pipe is and the sensitivity to it, but kind of in between that northbound lane is, we could come and cut in a line and stop that transfer of load that would ultimately push on that pipe as you are constructing. Because you're right, we don't know what's there. We know that there's jagged rock sitting on that pipe, and any sort of construction could certainly exacerbate it. So yeah, that is something we have been talking about and will be a recommendation. So the two dash lines then that say or, that really is or. It doesn't stand for anything else. I don't know why we just oversimplified it. But as we look at the context of needing additional lane capacity based on level of service, and talking through this as we looked at this overall, as we had to kind of combine the two, is if we started to look at widening on one side or the other, or both sides, then you're starting to create additional capacity for maintenance of traffic while you build the lines. So just one example is if you go widen to the east enough to get another lane of traffic in there, you can now push traffic to the east side, construct that effluent line and still maintain two-way traffic, and have something similar to the detour in July as opposed to something similar to the detour over Christmas. And again, that's why it was important we kind of captured those two different types of detours as we start to evaluate impacts to the public, because obviously the goal in all of this is to reduce the impact to the traveling public, but you got to fix this critical infrastructure that continues to fail. And so that's why those two lines we're looking at, and again, going back to if we're finding these layers and these shear zones where we can shear off some of that rock that was already widened to build the roadway itself and match that pattern as you start to expand, you can maintain traffic on one side and really start to reduce the impact of those travelers. There's still going to be impact no matter what. This is a major undertaking through this section, but starting to look at different opportunities for combining the two needs in a cohesive project. And so that's what that dashed line is looking at. So that is the end of the data collection, and now we'll talk through just the advisory group and the tech committee process. And so these slides are not near as exciting because we just have pictures of us like in a classroom and a lot of words. So I apologize to close with boring slides. So as everyone knows, in November, we had talked through getting a 15-member advisory group, and that's ultimately who was brought on board. I think some are in attendance today, and I think I want to just offer thanks. We offered thanks at the end of it, but they were really committed to this process through the 3 meetings that we held. Their objective was to, again, ultimately weigh the criteria. We had 10 specific criteria. They all started off at 10% of the overall, and ultimately through this process, we established the weighted criteria that ultimately the alternatives were scored against. And so advisory group meeting number 1 was February 6th. That process was just to introduce the overall project, discuss the data. A lot of it was presented, we're presenting here today. And so Mike, forgive me, you're hearing some of this data for like the 25th time. And so we talked process, and then we talked specifically what we expected and ultimately how we viewed the different criteria and allowed for a significant amount of questions during that time so we understood what the criteria was we were weighing these alternatives against. And then February 27th, we completed the exercise where we actually went through and weighed the criteria through the pairwise method, which the next slide will show just a snapshot of what that was. And again, we delivered project updates then as well. And just a couple weeks ago, we again gave project updates and discussed the results with that group. Pairwise is pretty simple. We have a series of 10 criteria. We evaluate each one against each other once, and ultimately each group member will have their priorities set based on a simple question of pick the option you feel the strongest about. So is it environmental quality of life, or is it roadway construction and maintenance impacts? Similarly, next question would be traffic flow and capacity versus cost. You repeat this 45 times, very simple. And then in the end, you individually have your priorities and weighting, and then we average that out over the 15 and determine in real time what that criteria is. We completed the exercise in that advisory group meeting number 2, minus 2 people who could not attend, and then they did it online later. And so we had initial weight scoring at that meeting, and then 2 days later it was completed, and then the results were sent out to the advisory group members, as well as we sent the raw data to them individually as well. So you could go back and kind of truth check your scoring and go, oh, this matches the scoring that I put together. And then this is ultimately where those percentages landed. This is an order of highest to lowest. So you see vehicular safety at 14.2%, environmental quality of life at 12.8%, all the way through traffic flow and capacity at 12.2%, environmental view shed at 9.4%, and then down through constructability and kind of long-term maintenance impacts kind of at the lower end, and then cost coming in at 4.2%. You can do the math, it adds up to 100%. Yeah, Gwen was pumped about that one. But again, we had a cross-section of community members completing this exercise, and everyone completed that in real time, and we were able to answer any questions that came through there and after, and then we used the third meeting to reiterate the results from here, and again, to discuss ultimately the alternatives that we're moving forward. Any questions on these results? I know these are boring. They're just percentages and letters. Oh, this one's worse. Look at all these words. So as I indicated earlier, we ended up actually evaluating 20 alternatives in total, and this is through kind of concurrently with our data collection. Our team used some of the recommendations that came out of the surveys from the end of 2023, as well as those public meetings. And then we generated some of our own based on some of our findings in the data. And so this is broken down into kind of just 3 specifics of the 20. So we had required improvements. These are improvements that must be done. Sightlines is one. You have to be able to see down a highway so you can make a turning movement. So that requires removal of vegetation or rock. We looked at the southbound Willow Lake roundabout approach and the fact that doesn't have a reverse curve coming in to slow traffic down. And so we took the opportunity to look at shifting the roadway over to the west. And then concurrently, the frontage road that's on there is actually a frontage road in front of those several businesses that are just north of the Willow Lake Road roundabout. And the proposal there is to consolidate those driveways into one and tie them into a frontage road that ties into the next adjacent street. This goes back again to trying to provide additional access control along the highway through consolidation of driveways. You've got some properties that have 2 or 3 driveways that are accessing the property, which may not be entirely necessary. So consolidation, removing some of those conflicts, but then certain things that just aren't meeting standard. And then the taper extension at the Phippen roundabout as well, extending that out to meet requirements and help alleviate some of that congestion that comes out of that southbound direction. And then we had no widening improvements, so this was just strictly keeping the roadway in its current width and only looking at intersection improvements. We looked at roundabouts at 2 locations, kind of in the middle of the project. I will say we did not look at traffic signals for several reasons. One, the traffic signal at Willow Lake Road roundabout was removed 20 years ago because it wasn't functioning based on the volume of traffic coming through. 2, you've got bookend of the corridor is 2 existing roundabouts, and changing driver expectation through this 2-mile stretch with roundabout to signal to roundabout. This is from a safety and expectation standpoint, that'll lead to driver confusion and not entirely necessary. But kind of the big things of it was looking again at consolidation and access control and right-outs of adjacent roadways. We need a place for them to turn around. So rule of thumb is anything within 1,500 feet, you can place a right out at a driveway and have them turn around at a roundabout. And then you've suddenly eliminated several left turn movements, which are going to affect the level of service as well as safety. And then one of the biggest concerns that's come about of a potential widening is if we widen and suddenly have this additional capacity, especially in the short term, what's that going to do for traffic speeds? These roundabouts can serve as traffic calming as well. And so these really served as kind of 3 different benefits, and we started to kind of lay those out, considering you already have roundabouts at the end of the projects. So the no widening was looking at roundabouts at several locations as well as right-outs. If we couldn't get a roundabout or anywhere to turn around at right-outs, we looked at acceleration lanes specifically for higher volume side streets that would benefit. This goes back again to that 90-second car that was waiting to make a left. If they had an acceleration lane, they could actually just wait for a gap in the northbound travel and not worry about finding a gap that lines up in 2 ways of traffic. So we looked at these individually in terms of number 1 benefit, let's have people turn right. Number 2, let's give them an acceleration lane in the median to allow for, again, a reduced potential conflict. You don't have to cross 4 lanes or 2 lanes of traffic. You would just have to cross 1. Then widening was actually broken into 2 specific segments. Widening was the full corridor. Let's just look at it from 5 lanes all the way through the whole project limits. That's the only one that is just strictly widening all the way to the 2 lanes in each direction and a separated median and then shoulders. That's the maximum improvement. So we mentioned again shoulders in terms of those are mitigation factor for some of those accidents, as well as we brought up earlier was just emergency response. If you've got lanes of travel that are congested and you've got to get police or fire through there, you can have vehicles actually pull off on the shoulder and actually make space for some of those emergency responses. So there's obviously an added benefit there as well. But then we looked at a combination of widening outside of the narrow section and then different alternatives through the narrow section. So a 4-lane section with just a separated by a barrier. A flex lane section, which we looked at actually 2 specific flex lane sections, one that would literally just fit within the existing roadway segment. The negatives of that are quite extreme. You would have then no shoulders, and the traffic patterns don't really lend itself to a flex lane because you have, again, that noon to 6 window of cars going in the southbound lane when you may want to prioritize northbound travel in the afternoon. So you're not really getting that AM/PM split that will lend itself to a flex lane. And then we wouldn't be proposing a flex lane similar to that you find in Phoenix, where you're just driving down a striped median and just confidently knowing that from 3 to 7, I'm allowed to go northbound in this. I'm going to trust everybody else. We weren't proposing that here. We were looking at more of a barrier-separated flex lane, similar to what you're seeing on I-17, and looking at kind of that infrastructure that would be required to make that actually work. And we talked through that with the technical committee in terms of like, this is what you're actually reviewing in terms of scoring of this alternative. We did look at a double stacked as well. And then we looked at simply, and the double stacked is, again, you've got your 2 lanes at grade, and then 20 feet above, you've got a bridge that's carrying traffic. We looked at that option because that was something that did come up at the end of 23. And then we simply just looked at tying 5 lanes into 2 lanes. Let's get our capacity outside of it, and then let's narrow it down into an existing section through there. And all of these, again, in combination, led itself to 20 specific alternatives that the technical committee came in and scored separately. Any questions on our alternatives? Or am I losing the group because I've been up here for an hour and a half? That could be the latter. So then this is just an example of how everything was ultimately scored. And so what's shown here is just a snapshot of one technical committee member scoring. And so this is an alternative. This is alternative 2B, which is no additional lanes, 2 roundabouts, and right outs where they're within 1,500 feet of a roundabout or a turnaround. This was one alternative that was scored by one of the technical committee members. So an example would be score 1, put in viewshed impacts, or environmental viewshed, they scored it a 9. But when you weigh that score at a 9.4%, based on everything scoring, that becomes a 0.85. So 9.4% of 9 is 0.85. You carry that through 10 times, and so this example of kind of the last few, if you score effluent wastewater line constructability and maintenance at a 2, I scored a 2 because it goes back again to you're trying to build an effluent and wastewater line through 2 lanes of traffic. The constructability and the maintenance of that is extreme because you have no work zone and no maintenance of traffic zone to work through. I scored a 2. At 12.8%, that gets to a 0.26. Carry that all the way through and everything's kind of weighted out of a 10. So your total score without waiting for that would be a 50, but that ultimately turned into a 4.76 after you score it. The spreadsheet, similarly, is available on the website as well. So if anybody wants to go in there and check all 200 cells of the scoring, we've done it. It's pretty fun. And so ultimately, all the scoring is out of 10. So this is an example of this one scorer scored this option at a 4.76. And again, these were independent. So the tech committee just reviewed the alternatives. They did not know what the weighted scores were because that would have maybe potentially made them score things differently if they knew what the scoring was. Vice versa, the advisory group was responsible for the weighted criteria. We did not discuss alternatives with them until after that exercise. We kept these both separate so we could come up with an overall score. And then so briefly again, the technical committee was made up of 5 members. So it was 5 technical professionals and a senior infrastructure analyst. So we had a geotechnical engineer, city traffic engineer, the city engineer, an infrastructure analyst, and a representative from County Public Works. So cross-section of all technical leads that would be able to come in and look at these alternatives and score them against the criteria from a technical perspective. We met on March 5th and March 12th. Similar to the advisory group meeting, March 5th was discussing the alternatives, introduction to the process, and then talking about schedule for getting the review, the comments or the scoring back to us. And then ultimately we had the March 12th meeting was after they had the information for a week. We were able to have a 2-hour meeting where we discussed any questions specifically on the data, anything specifically on what a certain alternative meant, and we were able to kind of go over their specific questions. Then 2 days later, they submitted their scoring sheets, and then we ran it through the weighted criteria and ultimately came up with the 3 recommended alternatives from that scoring. And so just again to clarify, it might look like these numbers are pretty tight, but this is a scoring out of 10. So,
Councilman Gambogi had a question.
yep.
Way back at the beginning, you had letter grades for 89. I think they were C, D, E, and F.
Yep.
Here, you've had 5 results on different scoring. What would if you picked your highest score, which is number 1, what would happen to the letter grade on 89?
So if you went with a 5-lane widening, your letter grade now would be an A. You'd be level service A on the road. But you would have, in 25 years, you would be at a level of service C/D. So kind of in that area of stable to unstable flow. So
Say
you're adding
again,
this
in 25 years, it would be a
C
C?
as opposed to an F.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and this was also, you'll see this on the score sheet. This was, some of this data was provided to the tech committee in terms of level of service based on improvements. So you would see level of service based on recommended alternatives, and then we also provided crash modification factors based on alternatives. So a shoulder reduces potential for crashes by a certain %. So they could look at technical data as they were scoring based on again, level of service. And then we also had in there, as they started to score, it was rock removal, which was based on not only just rock removal as a whole, but we looked at native rock that had not been touched before versus rock that had already been removed for a roadway element. So we broke down those 2 quantities so you could see here's native rock that's removed versus rock that's already been removed for the highway itself. And then we also had right-of-way acquisition. So we had some specific quantities within there based on how the evaluation progressed that we were able to provide to the technical committee as they evaluated the scores. But the results were a 5-lane right widening throughout the corridor and 2 roundabouts. Those roundabouts are located just north of Granite Gate and Calvary, in kind of an open space where there's a space where the rock is not as dense. So we kind of located it in that specific area because that was proximal to driveways to the south that they could utilize that as a turnaround. And then the other roundabout was located near the potential future park entrance at the southern leg of the old loop highway. Partially that was located there because we have space just because of the natural geometry of that intersection anyway. That lends itself to no rock removal to build that roundabout and very little, if any, right-of-way depending on the size of the roundabout.
Councilman Montoya.
Thank you, Mayor. Andrew, Councilman Gambogi asked about what the level of service would be for the first option. Do you have an idea of what the distinction is for option 2 and 3?
They will all have the same.
It'll all be effectively turning into an A, and then option 4 keeps it at a current level of service essentially.
So just to run through and everyone can read those up there, but they're 5-lane widening. 1 and 3 are the 5-lane widening throughout. The only difference is there's 1 roundabout as opposed to 2. The number 2 is a 5-lane widening and then transitioning to a 4-lane section just divided by a barrier only. So from a level of service standpoint, you're still going to get the same because we still have 4 lanes. You just no longer have it divided by a striped or raised median at 12 feet. It's more of a Jersey barrier type scenario. So we're able to narrow that overall roadway width, but you'll still get the same level of service.
And Jersey
improvements.
barrier, just for those of us who don't work in traffic, is what exactly?
Those 3-foot barriers that are shaped like New Jersey. No, just kidding. So they're the triangular barriers that are placed that you see primarily for temporary traffic control if you're driving down Phoenix or
They
when you're
call
kind
them
of flopping
Jersey
traffic.
barriers because it's like the state motto of Jersey to have traffic
Everything
barriers
under
everywhere.
construction, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And the point of that though is because there'll be need to access potentially the affluent line in the future at some point.
Need to access what?
The affluent line. I assume the
Yes.
line is going to run through the middle of the road. Is that?
Yeah, so that's a good point. That was one thing that was discussed with the tech committee is if we would like for those barriers, if that's the alternative to move forward, to just be pinned and have the ability to remove them if you have to come out and be able to use that to maintain traffic if you have to work on that effluent line. Otherwise, you'd build it in a permanent location right down the center of the roadway. But it was something to consider in terms of maybe some flexibility in being able to shift traffic and maybe utilizing a temporary barrier in a permanent condition, but you could also be able to utilize that for traffic. Now, keep in mind, the goal is once the effluent line goes in, and again, it's properly backfilled and trenched and bedded, then you will have very minimal maintenance that will have to be done, but you'll have to have regular maintenance on it. You have to kind of flush the system. From a wastewater standpoint, you need to access the manholes, so you can come and clean that out. So there's obviously maintenance that has to happen where you will need that corridor and access. So yeah, that was something that was discussed specifically from the senior infrastructure analyst, that like it'd be really nice to have some ability and some flexibility if we are putting a barrier in to move it out of the way if we've got to get in there and maintain this effluent line.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Furworth.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 questions. You said 1, 2, and 3 were a level of service A degrading. What was number 4? Because you didn't add any lanes.
In any lanes. So 4 is going to operate similar to
Right now,
level
we're
of
a
service
D,
that we
mostly an
predicted.
E.
Mostly an E, and that'll
So that's how we
continue to operate
start
the same.
with this option.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then my second question was, I know it was with the 5-lane widening number 1 with 2 roundabouts. What is, we got 2 lanes going in one direction, 2 lanes going, is the middle lane that left turn acceleration lane, or what is the middle lane?
Oh, you're talking about this graphic here?
In number 1, 5-lane widening.
And are
I
you-
said 5-lane widening with 4 lanes. I understand you're putting a barrier in. What's 5-lane widening number 1?
So 2 lanes each direction and then a 12-foot median in between. That's the 5 lanes
12-foot
total.
median.
Yep. A center left turn or a center striped median. One of the things we're still exploring is certain areas where we might want to convert that to a raised median, especially in areas where
In the
we
narrows,
have
yeah.
driveways.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Councilman Gambogi.
Many times I've said that whatever we're considering is not a bivariate. It means it's not a standalone. You could see from your analysis earlier, because people can't afford to live in Prescott, we have a lot of traffic coming down Willow Creek and 89. Just recently, we passed Proposition 478, where Fire Chief Holger Durr was going to build some fire stations. Where would the fire stations be related to this 89? And with that in mind, how does that impact these 4 results? It's all yours.
I guess that's my cue. Fire Chief Ogredura. So yes, good question. Right now, we are looking at locations adjacent to both the Watson Lake Roundabout as well as the one near the Phippen Trailhead. Currently, we're looking at city-owned land on the, I'm going to get this off here, but probably the northeast corner of the Watson Lake Roundabout. That's correct. And then the other one is near the Phippen Trailhead at a location, final location still to be determined, but they would be adjacent to both of those traffic circles at this point. We're working with Public Works on traffic engineering and access and all of those. And of course, we wouldn't execute those sites if that were to cause any interruption to that. But we're still in that engineering phase. And Gwen, I don't know if you want to maybe expand on that at all, if I haven't been clear enough. Because when I get into traffic engineering, I'm definitely getting into an area that's not my expertise.
Andrew has 4 results up here. If you've got a fire station on both ends of 89, which of those options allows for emergency fire engines to go up and down? Which is the best option?
Well, I'm going to leave the best option, I think, to the professionals. I will tell you that all of them would help us tremendously, and anything that has dedicated flow and better flow is always good. Anytime we're on a single lane highway and there's an obstruction, that's a definite risk that we're taking. And the other thing is sometimes...
So that would exclude option 4?
I would, yes. I mean, but that's what we have now is basically the situation that we have. If we have to go into oncoming traffic to get around an obstruction, the risk to the public and our personnel does increase significantly, and we don't like doing that.
Okay, let's try to wrap up the council's comments. We got, I think, 11 requests to speak, and I would like to hear from the public. Do you have any last closing comments, Andrew?
I'll just briefly go over next steps, design concept report, and then we have dates for the 60-day public comment period. So as Gwen indicated, July 8th will be the next time we're here for the 15% DCR and plans, and that'll be study session number 1, and that will open the public comment period. Study session number 2 will be public hearing number 1, August 26th, and then September 9th, which will close the 60-day period as well as be that public hearing number 2. So those are key dates for everyone here to know when we're coming back with next pieces of information.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. A lot of technical information, but boy, it seems crystal clear to me that this has to be done, and that we have to make a decision on the best option, and then we have to proceed as expeditiously as we possibly can. Because with the continuing deterioration and breaking those lines, we're going to just see more and more of this alternate high-level vehicles going down Willow Creek Road and potentially down 69 as an alternative, and it's not going to be pleasant. Thank you very much. So we'll go to public comment now.
Mike Coffey.
Should I stay up here?
Okay, is that a good enough microphone for you all? Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Coffey. My wife and I have had the good fortune to live the past 30 years in the heart of the Granite Dells. I'd like to thank the city staff for including me as a member of the advisory group. I confess that I was a willing participant in a process to put a convincing veneer on what I believe is a predetermined conclusion. I felt it was a bit like putting lipstick on a pig, but I will leave that there aside today. The contract with Kimberly Horn says that 3 roadway alternatives will go forward to the 15% design concept step. Yet you have been shown 4 alternatives. You will be directing staff today to narrow to 3 the options for further detailing. It's on that decision, of which 3, that I would like to share a detail of the ranking process. 15 of us engaged citizens were asked to prioritize our...
You have a minute and a half.
I to prioritize our preferences for roadway improvements, vehicle safety, ease of construction, environmental quality of life, and traffic capacity top the list. Which 10 of the criteria would you guess came in last? It was the cost. But the roadway improvement cost will be a big issue for you in the future months as you decide among your options and how to persuade the voters to fund your choices. And you recall from the study session of a year ago that residents were overwhelmingly not supportive of costly widening for the convenience of regional commuters. Cost estimates for each estimate are not currently available. They will be available in the next step. You know that the elephant in the room is the cost of rock removal. The difference between the top alternative recommend for full widening and the not widening, by their estimates, is about 50,000 cubic yards. Google removal rock estimates, you'll find $200 a yard. And that's $10 million of taxpayer money. I'm going to finish. In all candor, the next couple of years are going to be a financial Wild West with national and state budgets in the toilet and maybe with unhappy taxpayers. You may need a want versus need situation where the best return on investment data will be critical. In conclusion, I suggest you direct staff to go forward with their top 2 alternatives. But for certain, the third alternative must be the one with the current roadway with 2 roundabouts and other safety considerations. Then, at the next step, you'll have the benefit of good data to support your decisions. Thank you.
Dottie Morris.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm here with the Granite Dells Preservation Foundation. I am very interested in preserving the look. This is a historical road. This is like going into Zion National Park and saying, let's blast those tunnels away. It's much easier to get to the town on either the west or the east side of Zion. This is a very special area. I think what is going to happen to this town is very much what happened in the past. We built a mall. The mall was supposed to draw all sorts of people in from Prescott Valley. It didn't happen. Prescott Valley has its own commerce there, and I think that's what's going to happen to the north side of Prescott. I think we should make every effort to preserve the Narrows going through the Granite Dells. It's been in movies. It's something that is historical, and I think it would be really pathetic to blast it apart to make it 5 lanes. Thank you.
Joanne Ohlers.
Good afternoon. Oops, I'm just going to hold it. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Joanne Ohlers. I live at 2911 East Granite Gardens Drive in Prescott, a short distance east of SR 89. I use Granite Dells Road daily as my only ingress and egress. I am therefore speaking for Save the Dells and as a neighbor who will be greatly impacted by positive or negative changes in the roadway. This roadway through the heart of the Granite Dells is the most attractive entrance to the city, and it deserves the very best planning. I do have some specific points to make and observations about modifications to that road. The first one, I feel in my heart and as an obligation to mention wildlife. If those of you who use the road may notice that we are losing wildlife around the roadway. I know that building overpasses and underpasses is a great feat and takes a lot of planning and tons of money, but we do have to keep wildlife in the conversation, especially porcupines, by the way, who lose their lives on that road. The idea of a raised median would be just extra detrimental to any animals trying to traverse that road. Next, I see that roundabout at Willow Lake and Watson being really an issue. I don't know how widening is going to help that roundabout prevent backing traffic up? We don't see really backed up situations on our road. An E or F based on capacity or volume, yes, but not as an issue other than what happens at that roundabout. So I'm concerned that
You have 1 more minute.
that will not be make any difference. The roundabouts leave no necessary gaps for people to leave the neighborhood. I'm concerned about that. The Granite Dells Road will have more traffic over time because the population of the neighborhood is growing, and we would certainly like to see a smart light there. I know the arguments against the smart light, however.
30 seconds, Joanne.
Yes. The people replied overwhelmingly in 2023 to oppose modifications to the Narrows. And I just want to remind us that little by little we lose or save what we love. Thank you. Just going to
Walt Anderson.
Thank you. I'm Walt Anderson. I live in exactly the same place as the previous speaker. And I'm very first of all, the issue that we're in is because we live in an affluent society. And yeah, they had to have a little pun in there. But anyway, I'm very concerned about Granite Dells Road too. Even now, we have impaired ability to get out on the road, even turning right at certain times of day. And as the traffic increases and as the road population increases in there, it's going to be harder and harder to do a right turn in there because there are no spaces in there through much of the day. So I too would like to recommend the smart light option. I think the argument that people aren't smart enough to figure out that you can go from a roundabout to a light to a roundabout, I think is probably not giving enough credit to the people. I really think a smart light would work well, and Calvary Lane and Granite Dells Road are in a cross intersection there. Also, if you force people to go right, you're really doubling up the traffic on a certain stretch of the road because they have to go one way and come on back. So you've really increased the amount of traffic on that section of the road. I too would like to minimize the damage to the Narrows. Highway 89 is a scenic highway for all of its length. It's declared as a scenic highway. And the portion in the Dells is probably one of the prettiest. We don't complain. Probably the slowest part of the highway right now is a section through Whiskey Row. And we're not talking about widening the Whiskey Row area. People slow down there because Whiskey Row is an amenity for the community. The Narrows in the Granite Dells is an amenity for the community. So I would like to keep that as complete as possible. Thank you very much.
Jim Gehring.
Oh, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Jim Gehring. I live in Prescott Lakes, and I don't have a lot of things to say about preserving the beauty of the road, but I do think that with regard to the effluent main, you should give some consideration to perhaps pulling a HDPE liner through it to make it more reliable during the project. And I kind of wonder whether it has cathodic protection on it. I mean, I currently help manage a project with that kind of a pipeline that was put in 1966. And that pipeline's in great shape, but it's got a cathodic protection system on it. So those are a couple things to think about. And then I'm curious about the fact that it's a regional road we're talking about. So that means to me, hopefully we're going to get regional help in paying for the improvements, whatever they are. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Kelly Kading.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name's Kelly Kading. You might know me as a columnist in the Courier, and I've written about this some. As someone that's worked for a consulting, engineering, and transportation firm that competes with Kimley Horn, it pains me to say that they did an excellent job with their data and their presentation and their graphics. I'm very impressed. But I also have been looking at this area for a long time. I'm a fan of national parks. I'm a geologist, so I love rocks. This is an area that's already disturbed by a highway, an area that was basically hacked through the rocks in the 30s with little regard for the look of the rocks. I have to think that a modern construction process would probably be much more sensitive. My only real suggestion on this project would be that the 5-lane widening is going to give the capacity that the town will need for safety of its citizens in the future. But I'd like for the council to consider possibly adding some enhancements to the park away from the transportation corridor so that any lost recreational activities that people might do within 100 feet of a highway could be taken somewhere else in the Granite Dells so that we can continue to enjoy this amenity. That's all I've got.
Kathy Rusing.
Good afternoon. This is kind of strange being on the other side of the microphone, but here I am. I'm just a concerned citizen today. Back in 2017, when City Council annexed Deepwell Ranch, they created a North Prescott. We now have a North Prescott and a traditional Prescott, and we need to accept that fact. Deepwell Ranch is the size of Anthem. It's actually larger than Anthem. It's 10,500 homes, and we need to accept the fact that it's going to be its own separate city out there someday. It's going to have its own restaurants, shops, services, grocery stores, and it's going to keep the people that are living out there in the future out there. They're not going to be driving down Willow Creek Road or 89 to grab a jug of milk at the store or to get a bite to eat. The Narrows through the Dells is a very iconic historic byway. It should be preserved. I support the fact that the affluent line needs to be replaced, but we can find a hybrid way to improve safety for access for the people that live in that historic neighborhood. I do not think we should put a 5-lane highway through the iconic Dells, a scenic byway, through a historic neighborhood. We need to say, no, let's not bend the knee, and we need to preserve our wonderful Granite Dells. Thank you.
Michael Fan.
Good afternoon. Mike Fan, 132 North Montezuma. Quick background, I've built and helped design roads my entire life. We were the second bidder, the proverbial low bidder out of Phoenix, put in that effluent line back in 1977 or 78. We put in the sewer line on the other side of the road. We blasted it all across the street in 79. It was a ductile iron pipe that eventually corroded out, like this one is doing. We replaced that with a Hobus line in 2012, I believe it was. And we built Granite Gate Resort, did all the blasting for the turn lanes that go into Granite Gate Resort. Blasting's not a bad word. It's needed sometimes. What I hear the opponents of widening tell you is disregard the very well-respected professional engineer we've hired, disregard the advisory group, disregard our public works department that we pay good money to, disregard our police chief, disregard our fire chief, and not do anything there. That road is already a service level E today, and it's soon going to be an F. Service level F means people die. It doesn't mean traffic slows down, it means people die. Dad and his 2 kids died on Williamson Valley Road a couple weeks ago. And that's what's going to happen here if it's not done. If there's a T-bone accident or a head-on accident in the middle of the Dells, you can't even get, in its current condition, emergency vehicles to that accident. And accidents are indiscriminate. It's moms, it's dads, it's grandmas, it's grandpas, and it's sons and daughters. Sorry, I'm emotional about this. To not do it is irresponsible. To not do it will get this city in a lawsuit because we ignored the very people that said, you need to do this. And believe me, with the way, when we build roads around this state, there are accidents, and yes, we get sued too. And the first thing that happens is you have a responsibility, both ADOT, which is our main customer, and contractor, to provide safe passage for those people. So I'm asking you to do what is intellectually correct, maybe emotionally incorrect, but it has to be done. There's no way around this. Thank you.
Ruth Ann Norris.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, City staff, my fellow residents. I'm Ruth Ann Norris. I'm a resident of Prescott at 1031 Highland Circle. I'm the past president of Granite Dells Preservation Foundation. So just saying that, you can know what side I'm going to take on this. Prescott is such a special place, and it's really hard for me to believe that our residents cannot slow down for roughly 2 miles, I believe Andrew told us, through that one section. Why is this impossible? When you travel through the Narrows, that's the closest that a lot of people ever get to our beautiful dells. And it always strikes me as odd that every promotional bit of material that I see in Prescott, including these slides right here, all feature the dells. The Chamber of Commerce has material that features the dells. The phone book cover, the dells. How can we be so cavalier as to say, well, it's just some rocks and we can just blast them away and it'll be okay? You know, we've already lost important historical aspects of our community, and we need to focus on what we can still save. I just hope that, I know, and I want to say, I know this is a really tough issue. There's a lot of aspects to it, not to mention just the cost, which will be extremely high. And then it's only going to be good for 25 years. There must be other things we need to think about, dare I even say bicycles or public transportation, because this madness of cars everywhere ruling our lives really should
You have
stop.
1 minute.
I'm finished, Mayor. Thank you.
Larry Meads.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Larry Meads. I'm a resident of Prescott Lakes, just a couple of miles from the roundabout. You know, you guys are going to take slings and arrows no matter what you choose, so use your best vision. I think the wider area is really the way to go, and I'm sure it can be done tastefully and with sensitivity so that it won't look like a war zone or a battle zone when it's done, but it's going to look nice, actually. So hang in there.
That's all, Mayor.
All right, well, I appreciate all the comments. Obviously, this is a complex and highly controversial issue, but looking at the data here and looking at the growth projections, it's pretty clear that we have to be able to move traffic more efficiently with the least amount of impact. So we're going to be contemplating the options here and making a decision on which one to recommend. Mr. Gambogi.
I think it was Winston Churchill who once said a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets to put its pants on. I went over to Andrew's page 13 and added up all the people who drove on 89. On page 13, it says 2018 traffic volumes are 17,000, and Andrews added up to 15,000. So that was on page 19. So 15 out of 17,000 are people that work, which means they're not going to be in the separate city up at the Dells. They're going to be coming down 89 to go to work. Thank you.
All right, our voting meeting will start in 5 minutes, so this study session is adjourned.